Okay. Good morning again to everyone, and welcome to the first ComScholars seminar that we're hosting by the CCS. My colleague Mzamo is about to come on and join us. To those of you who don't know me, my name is Philisiwe Mazibuko, and I am a community scholar at the Center for Civil Society at UKZN. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to this, our virtual discussion on the vaccine rollout in South Africa. I'd like to welcome all of our speakers. I see that we're all here. And I'd also like to welcome members of the media who are going to be covering this event for us. Thank you for joining us. And of course, we're going to have our speakers who are going to give us some insight from the different expert areas that they work in. And then we're going to have a period of discussions where all of us can join in and ask questions. You're always welcome to use the chat function and send your questions through there, and we'll note them, and our speakers will get to answer you when we get to the question and answer sessions later on. Mzamo. Okay, Mzamo's going to join us in a bit. I'd like to welcome our first speaker, Kathy. Yes. Kathy Elando. So as you guys saw in the invite, Kathy is a gender campaign and advocacy officer at the Human Rights Institute of South Africa, HURISA for short. And Kathy has been building HURISA's niche for protecting the rights of women, and in particular to claim their rights, safeguarded in national frameworks. We know that South Africa is one of the places where our legislation is high in the world. And Kathy has been doing that work at HURISA, of course. Some of those national frameworks include the Constitution, legislation, regional and national, international human rights instruments that are ratified by South Africa. Welcome, Kathy. You will have 15 minutes as of now, and you can, of course, do your presentation.
Oh, okay. Okay. Good morning, everyone. And thank you to the Center for Civil Society in KwaZulu-Natal for giving me this opportunity to present my statement on the COVID-19 pandemic vaccine rollout strategy. On 20 January 2021, the Minister of Health, Dr. Zweli Mkhize, conducted a CSO consultation to discuss the country rollout plan of the COVID-19 vaccine. So it was actually a webinar, an online webinar. So this information has been updated because a lot has happened since then, raiding procurement of vaccine and vaccination of citizens. As we all know, the world is going through a global crisis due to the COVID-19 pandemic. It has exacerbated South Africa's variant that led to the second wave of COVID-19. So according to the World Health Organization, it has been identified that the only way to curb this variant is to herd immunity through vaccines. So the government has been in the process of procuring large number of vaccines with aiming of vaccinating 67% of the population this year. So the aim of the vaccination is to prevent mobility and mortality, to achieve herd immunity and prevent ongoing transmission. So the vaccine overview that they highlighted was that all vaccines go through a comprehensive approval process by medical regulators to ensure that they are safe. So we all know that South Africa received its first batch of 1 million Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine on the 1st of January 2021 from the Serum Institute of India. This vaccine was found to have limited efficacy against mild and moderate disease caused by the COVID-19 variant dominant in the country. So the procured AstraZeneca vaccine was sold to the AU and has been distributed to other countries across the continent. So after the first incident, the South African government, guided by the Ministry of Health, decided to initiate a rollout plan which prioritized healthcare workers, and they received a Johnson & Johnson single-dose vaccine. At present, 291, 340 healthcare workers have been vaccinated under the Sisonke protocol. So the clinical trial showed an 82% efficacy in protecting against severe disease. So in addition, 30 million of Johnson & Johnson vaccine had been secured. So Pfizer, which is known as biotech vaccine, the Food and Drug Administration has given emergency use authorizations to the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine. This vaccine has an efficacy rate of 95%. So South Africa has secured 20 million doses from Pfizer. Pfizer is also offering an additional 10 million doses incremental, which are expected to arrive from May and June respectively. This means 30 million doses of Pfizer vaccine have been secured for this year. So the National Department of Health is planning to secure additional 10 million doses of Sputnik vaccine and Sinopharm from Russia. This is subjected to SAHPRA approval. So they are still waiting for SAHPRA to approve it. So the rollout of the vaccine will take a three-phase approach that begins with the most vulnerable in the population. Phase 1 will focus on vaccinating 1.25 million frontline healthcare workers. So despite South Africa linking its phased approach to the rollout with less than 300,000 healthcare workers vaccinated out of 1.2 million in phase 1, the Department of Health is readying itself for the next phase, which aims to vaccinate more than 16 million South Africans. Phase 2 will focus on essential workers, persons in congregated settings, persons over 60 years, and persons over 18 years with comorbidities. Right now, as we are in preparation for the phase 2 of the country's vaccine rollout, Health Minister urged persons aged 60 and older to register for their shots. And phase 3 will focus on persons older than 18 years, targeting 22.5 million of the population. So the allocations of the vaccine to the various priority groups is being guided by the Ministerial Advisory Committee, meaning the MAC advises the Health Ministry on all matters pertaining to the coronavirus vaccine development and rollout. The vaccination system will be based on pre-vaccination registration and appointment system. All those vaccinated are placed on a national register and are provided with a vaccination card, which will be required for overseas travel. So the statement that was shared with Dr. Zweli Mkhize on Twitter highlighted the current situation right now. It was found that 6 females in the US developed unusual blood clots after being inoculated with Johnson & Johnson. However, in South Africa, there has been no report of blood clots after vaccination. So based on the scientists' advice, the Johnson & Johnson rollout was temporarily suspended until the causal relationship between the development of clots and the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is sufficiently interrogated. So it has also been highlighted that if Johnson & Johnson is completely halted, they will have impediment to proceed with phase 2 of the rollout with Pfizer. If you fall under phase 2 category, so you are required to have your identity document with you to register. And once the registration process has been completed, the Department of Health will communicate the time and the place the vaccine will be available. So as per government plans to roll out the COVID-19 vaccine, as announced on 20 January 2021, Health Minister Dr. Zweli called on civil society to help dispel dangerous misinformation, help drive behavioral change, help communities understand the importance of vaccine when it arrives, help promote the national vaccination campaign. So the challenges, what are the challenges in its implementation? From the feedbacks that we receive from grassroots human rights defenders, raising voices from the ground in communities during our COVID-19 vaccine rollout plan virtual consultation that was held on 4 February 2021, they highlighted that there was lack of consultation with civil society organizations and human rights defenders as key drivers working with communities at grassroots level. So this limited their ability to raise awareness and promote behavioral change. So the lack of transparency persisted, including access to information in terms of after effects of the vaccine, resulting in fear, misconception, trauma, emergence of depopulation narratives, and anxieties in communities. So traditional practitioners were excluded in the consultation, including other authors of indigenous plants in government process, exploring cure for COVID-19. There was a concern that the government rushed into procuring the vaccine without exploring alternative remedies for curing the pandemic, especially not recognizing contributions of traditional practitioners and herbalists. So the civil society organizations recommended inclusion of these stakeholders in government processes, searching for sustainable solution for curbing COVID-19 pandemic. So suggestions were made for the government to consider working with countries that opt to rely on traditional herbs extracted from the wealthy African ground as alternative healing methods. So at the NGO Forum for Participation in the 68th session of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, it was said that the African Union pledged AU states members to allocate 15% of the annual budget to improve the health sector aligned to the Abuja Declaration of 2001. It was also established that only few states managed to meet the 15% annual budget, causing a backlog in securing the COVID-19 vaccine. Because of cost implications as vaccine manufacturing companies are based in rich countries. So African countries face not only the supply problem, but also uses relating to storage and logistics when it comes to administering the vaccines. While South Africa government has become the world champion in the call for equitable access to COVID-19, they are proposing, together with the government of India, patent waiver on COVID-19 health technologies, along with the need for agreement to enable technological transfer and investment in local pharmaceutical production capacity for Africa. So this will enable countries in Africa and elsewhere to access active pharmaceutical ingredients and benefit from technology transfer, including the know-how to manufacture vaccines in Africa at a cheaper cost. So as we commemorate the AU theme of the year on art, culture, and heritage, this levers for the building the Africa we want. This calls for an African culture renaissance which preeminent and inculcates the spirit of Pan-Africanism. This augur well with the AU theme on art, culture, and heritage to assert Africa's traditional healing methods developed for combating COVID-19 while we await the procurement of the COVID-19 vaccine. Thank you.
Here we go. Thank you so much, Kathy, for that input. And you've raised, there we go. You've raised some very valid points, and the statistics are quite shocking at the beginning. And I think as civil society or as NGOs, it's very important for us to be in such spaces and discuss these things, right? Because it affects a lot of the people that we interact with in our communities, the constituencies that we represent. Thank you very much for that input. We're going to have our next speaker, or Dr. Lucas Mkhojana. I think that's the one. Oh, all right. So Dr. Lucas is currently the Deputy CEO at the KwaZulu-Natal Christian Council, KZNCC. He obtained his PhD in philosophy from the University of KZN, and he's authored many books and papers on the philosophy of medicines. He also works and connects to churches and communities to the provincial legislature and conducts lobbying and advocacy workshops for NGOs. Dr. Lucas, welcome. Dr. Lucas. Can we all please just remember to mute our microphones so that we don't have background noises and sounds during the session? Okay. Seems Dr. Lucas is not able to join us for now. Okay, we'll move on. We'll move on to our next speaker for the following session. And our next speaker is Ungazini Ngidi. Ngazini, are you here? Ngazini was here, I saw her. Okay. So it seems like Ungazini got kicked out for a bit during the session. Okay, all right. Oh, that's unfortunate. All right, then we'll move on to our next speaker, who is actually from the following panel that we're supposed to have. And I'd like to remind us that should you have any questions or comments or concerns, please make use of the chat function, and then we'll talk about them at the end. Okay, so Dr. Lucas seems to have joined us now. Dr. Lucas Ukon. Dr. Lucas. Okay, that's fine. That's fine. We'll move on to, so as Dr. Lucas and Ungazini join us again when they get back, we'll go back to them and have them present to us. So now we'll move on to our following speaker, who's going to be on the third panel, Ms. Nomfundo Mkaba. Nomfundo, are you here?
Sorry, I'm here, Precious.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. Yeah. So in a moment, Ms. Nomfundo Mkaba will give us her presentation. So Nomfundo is based in Roseneath on the south coast of Durban. She's a qualified teacher with a bachelor degree in the intermediate and senior phase, and her focus areas are leadership, environmental sustainability, gender equity, and education. And just recently in 2019, she co-founded an NPC called Executing Campaigns in Malundi Township of Roseneath in Umkomazi. And she currently serves as the project developer at the NPC at Waste for Change. Nomfundo, welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me. I don't know if you guys can see me. I'm just having technical issues. But yeah, can you hear me, Precious?
Yes, I can see and hear you very well. Wonderful.
Awesome.
So
thank you very much.
Okay.
All right. So thank you very much. Okay. Thank you very much, and very good morning to everyone who is here. It's a great privilege to be part of this conversation, mainly because the scope of the project of Waste for Change, as Precious has mentioned, has been low-income or underserved communities. So I think it gives me an opportunity to then reflect on the work we've done pre the pandemic and the work that we have been doing during the pandemic, and what were the real factors that were now affecting the issues that we currently face. I know the previous colleague has mentioned a lot of issues that have mainly affected people from low-income communities or people that have been marginalized and indigenous or poor people. So I'm basically going to be focusing on issues such as the socioeconomic issues of our country, which we face, we saw a lot of people losing jobs, being frustrated, being displaced, being uncertain of what was going on. And then the main focus was then now the overburdened public health sector, which catered for masses of people in these communities. So now we're looking at the social exclusion of these people who could not access rightfully the health services because of many other reasons. You would actually see long lines in clinics. There was social distancing as well. And the main focus, again, we need to also bear in mind were the historical disadvantages of many racial groups, mainly Black people who were in these low-income communities. What were they going through? Could they access services accordingly? And the professional placement of people who were there, or the professional capacity that were in these hospitals, were they rightfully placed, and were they catering to the people of these communities? Because if we could not utilize the public health sector, we then overburdened, or we then utilized services from the middle class, if you're part of the low class community. So now if you could not afford or be part of this fraction that now can afford services of the middle class, you were left unattended to. I love the mention of the previous speaker who mentioned issues of procurement, issues of management, issues of supply. Because if we are looking at a vaccine, we're looking at things that say we can procure a vaccine, but again, we must also bear in mind that the people who, if we procure or supply or manage the vaccine, it would mean excess. It would mean the extra rights vaccine. You know, there's a lot of vaccines that were mentioned, or were going to be part. Some were put on hold. Some were there were other myths and issues. So if you're talking about excess from basically a low income issue, we're looking at basic services which were very far away from people who could utilize them. And if they could not utilize them, we are then talking about managing this vaccine. If we're managing this vaccine, means there needs to be a certain amount that's being managed or being supplied or is accessible to people in all types of communities. If you're talking about equity as well, it means everybody has access to the services. But we know, due to historical disadvantages, a lot of issues were coming into play where not everyone has access or has the right to have this vaccine. So there's just no confirmation that everyone will actually get the vaccine and on time. So it actually heightens the inequality gap between the vaccinated and the unvaccinated number of people in communities. So we also must bear in mind and look at the conceptions and the myths and the type of how this information was circulated, because it meant we needed to have access to smartphones, and that's another issue faced by low-income communities. There's issues with electricity, meaning it affected our network, so we could not access rightfully the information accordingly. And another very fine line between accessing the vaccine was the language barrier. Most information was circulated in English, which is not a problem as it's been a medium. But again, we must also bear in mind that if this information is then circulated in English, does it then not eliminate the person who's only been exposed or processes information in a different home language, necessarily being Zulu, Pedi, Xhosa, and the information that was circulated were now the scientific details placed or articulated correctly for a 60-year-old illiterate person from a disadvantaged community to fully understand that if you are then vaccinated, do you understand the consequences beyond that? And the placement or the professional placement of nurses and doctors who are working in these communities, were they aware of the community mapping? Was that done, that baseline done well in advance to make sure that that everyone fully understands the consequences of what is going on? And then for these people who are in low-income communities who have been utilizing indigenous medicines or only have been exposed to indigenous information, were they catered for? Because we know the elimination of indigenous capacity has been an issue for the longest time. So now there's a lot of, no, we only heightening the information of scientific knowledge. And then what about the rights or the existence of indigenous people during this process? The cultural elimination of people who have only been utilizing indigenous medicines. How do we then draw the line in saying, you're going to be injected, it's not going to have an issue on your body, and what are the issues of utilizing such a thing on my body as someone who's just been utilizing indigenous medicine? For the longest time, we've seen low-income communities have faced a lack of services, from water to electricity and sanitation. These were the focal points that we needed to look at. Are these people have enough access for hygiene? Because there's been the emphasis that washing your hands, social distancing, being hygienic were the issues. But if we then referencing to what has been happening, people have been out of water for 3 days, that they have been utilizing the environment as the second option for sanitation. What happens then? Are we also addressing those issues? And for someone who's been working in the environmental sector, we then understood a lot of issues again were around waste management issues, which could then also contribute to someone who was a 60-year-old who's diabetic. There's no infrastructure in those areas. What about those people again who've been experiencing a lack of access to services that were really important during this time? So what does it then say? Can we not then go again in the violation of our human rights? Because during this pandemic, we saw the national management policy really taking over our human rights, from freedom of movement, freedom, our privacy. It felt like we were now being surveillanced. Does it not also provoke a sense of people from this point in saying they would then utilize the invented spaces versus your invited spaces? Because even if that were to happen, a lot of people went into invited spaces basically because they had a perception that I'm going to get a job, I'm going to be maybe having an opportunity to go further. There were no serious participation. There's also a lack of, if we're speaking from the government who took over trying to manage without the human consultation, without engaging with communities. So we should be very mindful in saying that at this very point, the vaccine is not going to reach people in low-income communities because of access issues. It's not going to reach low-income communities necessarily because even the maybe research and reports and case studies were very fund-driven. Necessary to then go back and say, if they were fund-driven, they're not talking about the real access that low-income people were facing. They were left there to fend for themselves during the pandemic. They still are. It's a historical barrier. And yeah, so what then? Are we making sure that all of these people in low-income communities will get the full access of the vaccine, and rightfully? And then again, if we are talking about low-income communities, are we going to be making sure that we monitor the access to these people and making sure that the vaccine is the right combination that's been it's been access to everyone. How sure are we that if these vaccines are being circulated or being access to everyone, they are the right combination and they will not have any further issues with the people who use them? It's a really catch-22 sort of situation, because we're finding people are displaced, they are at disadvantage. What has been done to curb the situation? The pandemic heightened historical disadvantage, the structural barrier. People are still without water, people are still without proper sanitation infrastructure, but we are talking a vaccine. During the vaccine, there's been other diseases that have been neglected. In that neglect, if I have another disease that's dormant, that's not been attended to, and then I have now to get vaccinated for a corona issue, what about the other hind sites? You know, there's a lot of speculation. So who gives us the right answers? Are the reports that have been circulated correctly documented? And are they correctly documented in the sense that it speaks to everyone from the low income to the high income? Yeah, so I'd leave it at that for now, Precious, but I'm willing to engage more on the conversation should there be more questions arising.
Thank you very much, Nomfundo, for your input, and it was really informative, and it's really good to get a feel or a sense of what are our different communities and how are people in low middle class communities accessing the information related to the vaccine. How are they digesting this information, and how then is it changing their lives in any way, shape, or form, considering all of the limitations that you've mentioned before about how difficult it is for people in these communities to access what we deem as basic healthcare for ordinary and less deadly viruses, like your common cold, the flu, and immunizations for little children. We know that in some communities in South Africa, like you mentioned, that there is poor infrastructural development. A lot of people do not have access to these things. So there's this new threat now of the coronavirus and this new element of vaccination. And we know that just last week, in fact, the minister had opened up registration for vaccination, which is so the second phase of the vaccination period of South Africans. So he opened it up for people who are over 65 years, so they can register and, of course, be put in line or on the database to get access to the vaccine once they are, of course, eligible to get the vaccine. And we know that there are new structures being formed. There are new vaccination centers, in fact, that are being put up specifically for this particular task. So, of course, it's going to be interesting to see how is that rollout going to happen in communities where already basic healthcare services are limited and not, and people are not able to reach them. Thank you very much, Nomfundo, for your input. So some of our speakers are having a bit of problems or challenges with network, and they're being kicked out of the sessions. But we do have Comrade Ngazini Ngidi, who is with us. Ngazini, are you here?
Comrade Precious, I'm here.
Yes, ma'am. Wonderful. So we had skipped session Yako, you got kicked out for a bit, but we will give you an opportunity to speak now. And just to let everybody know who you are. So Ngazini Ngidi is a nurse by profession, and she currently works at the Prince Mshiyeni Public Hospital in Umlazi in Durban. She's also a human rights activist working with the campaign Right2Know, and has been part of the provincial working group for over 5 years. Passionate about women's development and the advancement of women's participation in political and progressive democratic spaces. So we will give you the floor now, so you can also give us your perspective, your view of how the vaccine has been, especially being somebody who's a frontline worker, in fact, who works in the profession, gets to engage with people in the communities on a daily basis. We'll give you your 15 minutes now.
Thank you, Comrade Precious. I'm trying to open my video here, but I won't keep it long because I know it will deplete my my data. I'm not sure whether you can see me. I think it would be fair that at the very least, everyone that does not know me see me a bit, then I'll close.
Yes, no,
can you see me, Comrade, there?
Yes.
Okay, then I'll close now. Comrade Precious and everyone who is here, I am Ngazini Ngidi. I'm a healthcare worker, a nurse by profession. However, I think I should state this clear before I even proceed, that I'm not speaking on the mandate of my employer. So I think it was very fair that was mentioned that I'm a nurse and I also work with a public health system. However, I want to clarify that I'm not here representing my employer. That should be clarified, and I also not represent Right2Know. I'm here as an activist and a nurse and a woman more than anything. I think that should be clarified before I even proceed. Comrades, COVID-19 is a war. And really, comrade, I think I should say this before I even proceed. You know, we thank God and applaud our collective effort at our respective levels to endure and survive the worst till now. And thus, that makes a COVID-19 vaccine our hope in realizing our collective dream of going back to normal, or at the very least, somewhere closer, if I can put it that way. However, rolling out of the vaccine process for COVID-19 hasn't been a walk in the park at all, not at all, because various challenges threatened to counter our effort. At our respective levels, obviously, government had its own share of its challenges, like the sourcing of funds and vaccine distribution strategy, consultation, but specifically as a healthcare worker, which locates me under phase 1, meant that we should solemnly give ourselves willingly to a process that was never known before, which is a COVID-19 vaccination. And I think we should also commend healthcare workers for doing it again. At least today, we have around less than 300, almost 300,000 healthcare workers that are known to have been vaccinated. And I think we can say it with a smile that in South Africa, we don't have reported cases of serious reactions to the vaccine. And that is very important to say before I even proceed, that even the 6 people that are known to have developed these rare clotting conditions are not from South Africa. So I think we should applaud a message because, I mean, not nurses, healthcare workers to be specific, for being a living testimony here today that this process does work. Anyway, comrades, we all know that towards the rolling out of the phase 1, there were different myths circulating around January, February. There were a lot of myths circulating through social media, more especially. You know the nature of social media. It easily fends everything easily like that. Why are we calling these myths? It's because they are information that are not accompanied by scientific tested evidence. That's number one. That is very important. Why are we saying this information were myths or are myths? Is that they normally don't come with any scientific tested evidence and usually without validated sources. However, that's why they are myths and misinformed and makes our work even hard. Among them was that a COVID-19 vaccine will alter your DNA, that COVID-19 carries microchips that can track and control vaccine recipients, that big business is pushing vaccines to improve their profit margin, that our government is colliding with big business around COVID-19 vaccine, and that COVID-19 vaccine carries a scary 666 mark. All those comrades meet, and also as well that COVID-19 vaccine can deform your physical structure. We also all those scary deformities that were circulating. All those myths or misinformations almost countered our effort to roll out the vaccine, and it meant an extra effort should be made to convince the general public to accept the vaccine as safe to protect the collective or the public from getting sick or dying. Due to this, some health workers, comrade, more especially in my institution, did not vaccinate. It's a reality that our level, our threshold level is not the same. Some of us were scared. Some of us wanted to give it a try, but mostly, comrades, it meant that some of health workers had to wait and observe the ones that had to give it a try initially, then volunteered after having seen that there were no reactions that were reported. Another thing, comrades, is that we'll remember that how things turn around after the cancellation of AstraZeneca, just before rollout. I think government did manage to maneuver and source out J&J in short space of time. However, different interpretations to that cancellation alone shook the entire process a bit, and ushering of J&J in a short space of time meant that phase 1 recipients were not well educated about J&J, like the basic side effect, the efficiency of the J&J. Healthcare workers were not that much prepared because of time. Time was the fact, and more especially the imminence of phase 3 was a bit compelling us to decide to partake in the process, even though we are not ready. It's a reality, comrades, that the state of readiness was not there because of time and because of the pressure from the imminence of phase 3. On the other hand, Johnson & Johnson licensing process with South African Health Products Regulation Authority, or SAHPRA, was still pending. Thus, Johnson & Johnson rollout on phase 1 was categorized as trial. Comrades, I want to state this categorization did not mean that Johnson & Johnson was on a clinical trial stage. It meant that because the licensing from SAHPRA was not yet complete, it was safe for the process to be declared as trial. But that this trial word does not mean that it was a clinical trial stage. That process was done and dealt with long time ago. However, that sent a lot of confusion to us healthcare workers, and we're generally scared to partake. But again, the risk of COVID-19 working condition persuaded us to decide to partake, comrades. But most of healthcare workers, most of my colleagues, if I can be blunt, some did not partake on the process because they were scared about the implications of this trial wedding. What does it mean? What are the implications of this process being categorized as a trial? Comrades, another thing, the reality and the sad reality is that for for us healthcare workers who were supposed to be recipients in the vaccine thing before. So it meant that we were the first, and it meant that we were not sure of what to expect, and we were scared. We're not referring anything to anything. We're only relying on the 18-page participation leaflet guide that was compiled by Sisonke protocol, and we were taking everything that we thought we need from that leaflet, because it tried to break down everything, answering everything. But even our institutions were too squeezed and damn squeezed. I can hardly remember as a worker being part of any orientation class or what that was intending to enlighten us a bit about the implications of engaging in the process, except this 18-page participation leaflet, which was not user-friendly to other members. Mostly we rely on word of mouth. What are the side effects we use to educate each other on the floor? The ones that have already read it will share with the rest that have not read. So it was a scary process, comrades, but we did it. Another thing that was a bit of a challenge was the online registration process, comrades. This EVDS online process, because we are healthcare workers, but we are not all techno-savvy. Thus, some of us were struggling to even register. And then as colleagues, we came in and supported each other all the way through the registration process. Another thing about this process is that this process was formulated while we were still preparing for the AstraZeneca. And the entire process for AstraZeneca was not the same to J&J. We already registered, and while we thought we already registered, then the AstraZeneca was cancelled. And then it meant that because one thing that came with J&J is that not all institutions were mandated to roll out, only a few that were mandated. And I think here around Durban or in KZN, there were 3. And fortunately, I'm working with one of the institutions that was also initiating the rollout, which made everything easier for me. So as I've just said, that few institutions were nominated for the rollout initially. And fortunately, I personally attended, comrade, the launch. And comrades, I witnessed the most painful and jubilant atmosphere when on the arrival of the vaccine, because I think, in fact, comrade, we cried and we adulated at the same time, because we realized that we had gone that far by grace. Sorry about that, comrades. And then the problem was that all the nearest hospitals, the public and the private, had to come to our institution for vaccination. And literally, at some point, we could see that our institution was not even managing, because it meant that our neighboring institution workers will come and to join or start the queue at midnight. And it was a very horrific and scary process. And I'm hoping that there were lessons that were taken from that whole process, because It was scary. Structurally, the space was not there, but we had to make a space for everyone that was coming in. But we had almost all eThekwini hospitals came to our institution while we're initiating. And the queues will start around 11 midnight. Healthcare workers wanting to get their shot. And it was very scary. At some point, healthcare workers would fight on the queue. It was very horrific, but it was, we felt that we've arrived, yeah. And we're happy. Then the J&J vaccine process is now precautionary put on hold, which is just recent last week, because of these rare noted clotting conditions. And I think we should commend our scientists for their vigilance and should consistently follow the developments around that. And we are also happy that the sourcing of more vaccine is now confirmed as well. We also saw in the media yesterday that some pharmaceuticals are opening up to support the rollout, because if we're struggling in my institution with dealing with the amount of people that work when the process is open for the general public. So I'm hoping someone out there is taking some notes and working in advance to see to it that everyone get his shot accordingly, without experiencing what we experience in our institution while we're still initiating. Comrades, I want to say there is progress. Ours is to play our part and read from reliable resources. And I want to urge civil society organizations to position themselves very well. Government must do something, but we also have a challenge to locate ourselves somewhere as civil society organizations, more especially around helping our general public around information. We can't keep on pointing fingers on government. Let us locate ourselves somewhere there and inform our public and our communities and counter the effects of the myths and the misinformation. And I want to say in my closing that it should be noted that vaccination does not mean that you don't comply to COVID-19 regulations. We are not there yet, comrades. We are vaccinating, but we are still complying to COVID-19 regulations. Up until it is confirmed that we are safe to go around without masks and everything that comes with being safe, that we should remain compliant. Can I hold there, Comrade Precious? I'll respond to any question that will arouse and learn challenges. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for your very insightful input. And if you can just have a look in the chat box, the messages of support for you and to other healthcare workers, thanking you guys for the selfless service that you continue to serve to our communities. And of course, these are trying and difficult times, because like you said during your presentation, that we're not comparing anything with anything. So everything is a trial, and we're all just prepared and hoping for the best. And thank goodness that in as far as the distribution of the South African vaccines, of course, in accordance, also a vaccine that is related to the South African strain. We know that there was a bit of a scare also, that now South Africa has a new strain that is different to that of other countries. Thank you again as a frontline worker. And I think as people who don't work at the frontline and get to witness these things every day, we almost sort of take ourselves, we're not entirely sensitized to the reality of it. And noting what are the real challenges that you have to face. And we do know that Prince Mshieli, in fact, was the hospital, the premier, with the first batch of the KZN doses were there. And I'm glad that you, of course, participated in the process, and hopefully we will be able to have you around to continue to assist and share this vital information with the people in your community and in the area. And of course, you also mentioned how it's important for us to locate ourselves and make sure that we get all of the information we need from reliable and valid sources. We do know that fake news is a thing. It's something, of course, unfortunate, but it's something that we deal with in this country and in many other countries. And it's important to not get consumed by some of the things we will see and hear and read about, especially on social media, because they are very limited ways to verify that information. Thank you very much for that. We have a message of support from Jane Knight Taylor. Jane says that she's also a healthcare worker and she's still waiting for her vaccine. And she doesn't think that the public realize the trauma, sleepless nights, and withdrawal from friends and family provided service to our greater communities. Dealing with and then she reminds the rest of us to please wear our masks and wash our hands regularly and social distance. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Ngazini, for your input. It was very, very much helpful. It gives us great insights into, on the other side, what is it like on the other side of the vaccine? Because us as the public, we just have one way to look inside to the matter. Thank you again. We do have, so some of our speakers unfortunately are not able to join us, but we do have our last speaker who is going to join, Mr. Tinashe. Unjanji, are you here?
Yeah, I'm here, comrade. Thank you so much. Comfortable for me, comrade Tinashe.
Tinashe, right, comrade Tinashe. So you, comrade Tinashe is currently the coordinator of the People's Health Movement of South Africa, and he has his main responsibilities are the day-to-day running of the PHMSA office, internal and external communications, mobilizing communities, founding and networking with other healthcare organizations in South Africa. He was also one of the founding activists of the Social Justice Coalition, and back in 2010, he was also among the founding activists that formed what we know now as the Right2Know campaign. Tinashe, thank you very much for joining us, and the floor is now yours.
Thanks, comrades. And I want to thank mostly those who have put this program together. I want to thank you for this opportunity. I work for an organization called the People's Health Movement South Africa. In the People's Health Movement South Africa, we strongly believe that health is a fundamental human right. Therefore, access to vaccine and access to vaccine, in particular the COVID-19 vaccine, it's also a matter of life and death. Therefore, I strongly feel that there is COVID-19 needs to be suppressed across the globe for all of us to be safe, not only for particular group of people to be, not only for particular countries to be safe. So what's been happening, comrades, is that during this pandemic, I think we've seen that we've been moving from lockdown from level 5 to level 1. This was trying the virus, but this really didn't work. And this actually, it only worked in a very short space of time. And also it had so much implication on our social and economy, especially for the poor. And we've also seen how authoritative was the military and the state. But at the same time, we also have got individuals who did a lot of work, NGOs who did a lot of work, and so forth. We also seen our health services introducing some steroids, oxygen, other drugs we know, but there is no cure. So we've been kind of locked in a cycle of lockdown, and then we unlock, hospitals get full and so forth. But this really didn't work. So as activists, as PHM, we are calling for equitable access of the vaccines, right? But the major problem that we are facing, comrades, is that we are facing what we call the patterns. A pattern, we know very well that a pattern is when you invent something and then you are given the right to own that thing. No one else can produce that whatever that you invented for a particular period of time, right? I'm sure we have also had the issue recently of what's this Master KG, is it KG Master, when he was demanding what we call royalties from people who his video in the Jerusalem dance, and he was mainly targeting the corporates who have actually put themselves on a spotlight. So the pattern does not really, it's not a problem when it's a lecture, when it's music and so forth, but when it's things like vaccine, medicine, goods, it's a problem. So when a drug company holds a patent, they have the monopoly to create that vaccine and that drug or that medicine in particular. No any other company can make the same kind of medicine without the permission. And for you, even if in the time of this pandemic, you cannot even make that particular drug because they hold the patent. Because of that, they now create what we call the monopoly. They can now be charging exorbitant prices. Whatever amount that they want to charge, it's up to them. And there's also lack of competition, and we know very well that competition would bring the prices down. We have learned very well from the campaign, from our comrades in the TAC. I want to acknowledge Comrade Philisiwe, who is here. The comrades really played, and other TAC comrades. You comrades, you really played a very, very important role that we did from what we've learned a lot from HIV. HIV as that without strong civil rights action, there's no gains. We succeed in bringing down the bring the medicine down through the mobilization and advocacy and legal challenges. It is I tend to be corrected here. The HIV drug was brought down from as much as $10,000 a year to $100 a year. This is through the civil society action that played a role in bringing the drug down. So the same thing also needs to be done with the COVID-19 vaccine. However, we've got what they are calling the COVAX, which is which is aiming at accelerating and speeding up the distribution, manufacturing of the vaccine. But there are actually some challenges with the COVAX itself. Under COVAX, it's only low-income countries who get the vaccines for free. Middle-income earning countries, we have to buy the vaccines at the market price. Money pumped into COVID does not change the IP protection, does not change the patent laws. It will still gonna stay like that. And we know very well that COVAX is only going to cover 20% of the population, which is not enough for us to get to the herd immunity. Vaccine also vaccinationism, like Pfizer is already reserved 80% of its vaccine to the global north, which means that we'll be left without the main manufacturing for the global north. The other problem with COVAX is that it relies on the market and there's no fixed price, and we cannot stop the privatizing of the patent law. It does not prevent countries, we know the rich countries, from cutting deals, and there's no a guarantee of us or any other countries getting the suitable vaccine, right? So, comrades, what we're missing, we need to call for a waiver on the patent law. This was done initially by South Africa and India. They wrote a waiver for they asked it to waive the intellectual properties on COVID-19 related technologies to the World Health Trade Organization during, especially just for this vaccine, but then it was met with some rejection from the rich countries, your United States, your European Union, Japan, and other rich countries. So what does this mean? The big pharma, the Gates, and them are there to benefit from this. We know that COVAX is insufficient, and it cements the patent law of the vaccine market. Pharmaceutical companies are seen as the heroes of today because they are producing these vaccines. But then we know very well that they're actually benefiting a lot from this vaccine. And also, if you were to look at the cost of the manufacturing of vaccine, comrades, these vaccines are mainly developed, or they are mainly funded from the taxpayers' money. We know very well that our government went on to put money in the research of these vaccines. We know very well that the money that we are paying as South Africa, it's double or tripled what the global north is paying. I can give an example of Uganda, who were being charged $7 per dose of AstraZeneca, which is a price of 20% of what South Africa paid for for the batch of AstraZeneca that we purchased. And the $7, it's actually three times more than what the European Union countries paid. So the other challenge that we are facing, comrades, is that the rich countries, they have already ordered the coronavirus in advance. We have got a country like Canada, they've bought 338 million doses of vaccines, which is 5 times more than their population. We've got United Kingdom, they've bought 557 million doses, which is 3 times more than of their population. The list goes on and on and on and on, comrade. So the manufacturers right now are at a point whereby they want to supply these comrades, these rich countries, the global north, and then they'll now come to us. To make matters worse, comrades, Aspen here in South Africa, he had signed a deal with Johnson & Johnson to package, to vial our medicine, to vial the Johnson & Johnson I'm not sure if the deal is still standing. So the Johnson & Johnson was going to come here in South Africa in bulk, and then it was going to go to Port Elizabeth at the Aspen factory, where they're going to put it in those vials, packaging it, put it in label, and then it goes back to United States, which means we will be left with no vaccines, yet we are packaging these vaccines here in South Africa, right? But I need to follow up and see if this deal is still on. Rich countries who have bought more of the vaccines have actually started their vaccination 4 months ahead of us, yet they are blocking us from accessing these vaccines. As I've mentioned, since these vaccines were developed using public funds, why are they being controlled by patent laws? So these are some of the challenges that we are also facing to access the vaccines as the global south. In closing, comrade, I just want to say we need to continue putting pressure. We've good lessons, we've got a good case study from TAC, and we need to continue demanding pharmaceutical companies to openly share their technologies with the COVAX and the World Health Trade Organization, so that everyone can get a vaccine. Equitable access to free vaccine for all is a matter of life and death. So we really need the vaccine for everyone, comrades. Amandla.
Away to Comrade Tinashe. Thank you very much for that valuable input and for all of the insight that you've given us. And it's very interesting that also in the description or the introduction of this particular event, we speak about how this vaccine is now creating, or it's a breeding ground for a vaccine apartheid, right? We know that, of course, as from the 24th of February, like you mentioned, that other countries have already started the vaccination process and had vaccinated a large number of their citizens. And by the 24th of February, approximately 216 million people had been vaccinated globally, and only 8.4% of these are in low and lower middle income countries, which makes up nearly half of the world's population. So at a time where people are contracting the virus and unfortunately dying at a much higher rate, the vaccination of the people is moving slower than, of course, we would have liked it to be happening. And in South Africa, there has been conflict between government and civil society, together with the scientific community, over the absence of a clear strategy to roll out COVID-19 vaccines. We've got some input from Ungazini as a frontline worker who did mention some of these challenges that we're facing. We also got some insights from Kathy, who mentioned to us that NGOs and civil societies need to get a say in this, in the strategy of how to roll out. And of course, we need to bring in valid information about our communities. Nomfundo did a great job of allowing us to get a brief insight into how her community and the people in her space are engaging with the information and the healthcare systems of this country. The role of the civil society is critical in this rollout. It needs principled, independent, informed activism that mobilizes power between the fact that vaccines are a public good and a human right. Civil society further needs an urgent tooling up on vaccine literacy, virology systems, pharmaceutical company, profiteering, and oversight of regulatory authorities. Tinashe, of course, also gave us some insight on the costings of how much exactly does it cost for in that insight. We, of course, I can see that some people are engaging in the chat function, which is wonderful to see. I will now hand over to my other colleague, our other civil society scholar, Mzamo Wenkosi from the TAC. Mzamo?
Yes, Philisiwe.
Wonderful, wonderful. You can continue where we have good news. So our previous speaker now to join us, and we'll have a session. Dr. Lu. No, Dr. Lucas. Okay, that is fine. That is perfectly fine. Mzamo, can you please read some of the questions that we have in our chat box? Okay. All right, we've lost Mzamo also. Thank you for Vuyiseka. Thank you. We see the link that you've shared with us for more information. So you mentioned that today's global protest, or there is a global protest challenging bid, big pharma greed. Of course, we can click on that link and get more information. Thank you for that. And then we have a question here that says, if some countries took the gamble and invested billions in vaccines that had not been developed, doesn't it make sense that they get access first? Unfortunately, it says, I'm not sure who's it directed to. Okay, Vuyiseka, you can speak.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, Philisiwe, it says you asked the question. So I think someone is logged in with your name. In my understanding is that vaccines or any therapeutics are not only developed through private companies' money only. Normally, it's also money from taxpayers, particularly, for example, if a state or government has invested resources in research like we do in South Africa, that then, in my argument, from an activist point of view, that vaccine or that therapeutic product, it belongs to everybody. So that means by privatizing a product or a vaccine that was developed by my money as a taxpayer, I should also have a right. If you remember that some of the vaccines that we're talking about today, including Johnson & Johnson's vaccine, it was developed in many sites, including sites in South Africa. Desmond Tutu Foundation had many sites here in Cape Town. So it is not fair then to say just because a company that is based in the US invested money in a vaccine development, but who were the participants who also contributed to the generation of that knowledge that this vaccine works? It's also human beings who are Black, who are from Africa, who are from South Africa, who developed that vaccine. So we too, as people who had contributed to that vaccine, deserve the vaccine. More especially, beyond just us who were participants in the vaccine, there is something called global good. Just because you developed a vaccine in the US, it doesn't mean only the people in the US deserve it. We live in a global society, in a global community. We live in, we should share or live by solidarity principles. So that's my little input to that. That no, not a country that has developed a vaccine should not be the first to get a vaccine. We don't live in islands. We live in a community, in a global community, and we all contributed towards that vaccine development.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Vuyiseka, for your input, especially for in the perspective of a civil society person or an activist who is in a community on the ground with other communities. Are there any other questions that other people feel would like to be asked? You can ask any of our speakers on any of the questions that they gave, and then they can give us more insights into what they have been saying. the absence of. I'd like to ask a question to Nomfundo Mukaba. During her presentation, she of invited spaces and invented spaces, or versus invented spaces. And I think maybe not a lot of us have had time to grapple or understand what each of these spaces might be. So I'd like to ask Nomfundo, do you mind maybe giving us a bit of insight or elaborating a bit on the difference between an invited space and an invented space?
All right, thank you so much, Precious. I'll gladly do that. Definitely invited spaces would definitely be your community meetings or workshops that are really centralized for community members. Put up notifications, inviting all of these people to come into that space because you are then invited to be part of it, which is would be number one for invited spaces. Invented spaces would be your protest action, because now invented spaces would be spaces that go against invited spaces or are dealing with issues of invited spaces, because I do not have the full capacity to participate in a meeting, or I was not aware. So it then provokes for me to then protest against a certain issue. I don't know if that gives enough clarity, Precious.
All right, thanks, Nomfundo. Unfortunately, in fact, for a bit, you broke up. I'm not sure if it's just me or,
okay,
or we all have a bit of that. Understand what an invented space is and what an invited. We have a question from Minoshni Pillay, who said that Nomfundo Mkaba mentioned a concern about a lack of engagement with local communities. Have you raised this with government?
Precious, my bandwidth is really low, so I do not know if you can hear me. But yeah, we have okay, from a very personal point of view, I have been participating in spaces where I am part of policy reviews. So during those policy reviews, we've been given an opportunity to then amend or give recommendations of possible policy reviews. So in that regard, I have definitely been functional in making sure that the plight of my communities or the communities that I've been working with that have had the focus of low income, that these issues are then raised on a bigger platform. I'm also part of numerous committees that also speak on marginalized or minorities, and then again articulating these issues. Yeah. Thank you, Precious.
To hear part of that. If you could please also just appreciate that a great deal, so we can hear what you have answered. We also have another question from Estelle Sinkins. It says, does the slow rollout of the vaccine concern you in terms of a predicted third wave of COVID-19 infections? Estelle, I'm not sure who you're directing this question to, or are you just putting it to the House at large? Okay. For us, I would then like to put this question, to pose this question rather to Dinashe.
Oh, sure. Thanks. Look, I'm having some sound problems here. So you are referring to Estelle's question, right? Look,
yes.
It's I don't see where the question is because I logged out and then I logged in because, or does the slow rate of the vaccine concern you in terms of? Look, for us to, it's not only the third wave, it does concerns me because we've seen some numbers going up in PE, and we are approaching winter. It does concern me that the rollout is this slow. So we are most likely going to have the third wave, but most importantly, we are also going. We as long as we don't get to herd immunity quickly, we might also be having other variants coming up, right? This would now mean that we'll see the vaccines that we think that these are the best vaccines, they'll mean that they will be less effective. So the quicker we get to our herd immunity, the quicker we eliminate the COVID-19, and we will be safe, and we won't be having more variants, and we won't be having more waves coming. Thanks.
Sure, thank you. Thank you very much, Tinashe. That was clear and concise. We have another question from Minoshni Pillay. So Minoshni says that Ngazini mentioned that working on COVID at Mshieni was traumatic and scary. So she's now asking, are you staff able to cope now? Ngazini, are you here? No, unfortunately, Comrade Ngazini has. But thank you very much, Minoshni, for your question. And you also continue and say that there are concerns that the registration system may prejudice the elderly living in rural areas and those who cannot access the internet or smartphones. What is the reaction of the forum on this? I believe we have another healthcare worker, Jane Knight-Taylor. Jane, if you don't mind, could you be able, please, to shed some light on, as a healthcare worker, are you now able, after the rollout or the beginning of the vaccination of frontline workers, are you able to continue or cope with the emotions and the reactions of getting the vaccine?
Philisiwe, thank you. I work at an educational facility, so I'm not actually like a frontline worker like the previous speakers, but during the second wave, it was absolutely terrible. So I can quite sympathize with the emotions of them working in the hospitals and, you know, organizing the rollout of the vaccines. At the moment, we are testing students at our healthcare facility. Obviously, we don't have the full cohort of students back on campus, so it's a phased return. So we do test all students that are symptomatic, and if there are staff members that are symptomatic, we are testing them. Fortunately enough, we do actually have a laboratory on campus that we are able to test, and we are doing a saliva test. So luckily, we haven't had any positives at the moment. But with the second wave, it was terrible. So I presume that, you know, with the isolation facilities, which I'm here in Durban, which was Clearwood Hospital, when we did send a student there about 2 weeks ago, there was only 4 clients in the care facility, you know, at the time. So I think the cases, the numbers are not as high as the second wave. But I do envisage that, you know, let's just hope that the third wave doesn't come and it's not as severe. So at the moment, we are coping at our healthcare facility. But I do, you know, I'm sure that all the other healthcare facilities that are testing symptomatic clients. Yeah, but if we do have a third wave, let's just hope that it's not as vicious as the second wave, because the isolation sites were full, the hospitals were full. Obviously, colleagues, friends of mine were working frontline, and it was diabolical. Ambulances were waiting for, you know, to take clients to the hospitals with somebody that was COVID positive, you know, waiting obviously for somebody to either pass away or be discharged from the hospitals, which I don't think probably the public realize. And yeah, concerning the hospitals, I don't think the public realize that it's not just any nurse, any sister that can look after a COVID client. Those are specialized sisters. They normally ICU trained. I worked in intensive care 30 years ago, so I cannot say that I would actually even be able to work in an ICU or look after clients that are needing specialized care. To prone a patient, it would take 6 healthcare workers to actually prone a patient, successfully. And then you've got to look after the tubes that are keeping the person alive. So it's not just straight going to hospital, it's everything else that is there that we need to consider about the healthcare worker. It was terrible. Also the exposures of the healthcare workers in the hospitals, the doctors, the sisters, the carers, the cleaners, everybody that was there are considered to be frontline workers because they are providing a service to the patients that are in hospital. And then saying that the healthcare workers, the sisters, the doctors, they were also getting sick, and a lot of them sadly passed away. We do know that there have been resignations from hospitals because of the trauma associated with COVID. My comment on the chat line there was the back end of the COVID, obviously with our patients, or not our patients, our students getting COVID and then reporting on the reporting lines. It literally took like 2 hours per case. And at one stage we were getting 11, 12 positives a day. So our lab would be testing the clients, and 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night time, you would be getting results. Remembering that we've worked an 8-hour day before, so now we're still waiting for the results, and then you've got to fill in the notifiable medical condition form and start the contact line tracing. So hence our staff working in our facilities were only sleeping 3 to 4 hours a night for at least 2 months, and that was weekends as well. So that's why I'm saying it was absolutely terrible. And I really congratulate all the first frontline healthcare workers working in the hospitals, because I know what it would have been like. I hope that helped a bit. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Jay. And unfortunately, I'm not sure whether it's my own connection. This now new normal reality that we all have to face about struggling with network and bandwidth and connections. But thank you so much for assisting us and giving us insight into the work that you do and the people that you get to engage with. And thank you, of course, for the effort that you put in to continuously ensure that the people in your space, especially the students, we know that students or young children were also part of the groups of people who are considered to be vulnerable to contracting the virus. We also have people who have answered rather part of the other question. Philisiwe says that we have reached out to churches to help register the elderly, also use the manual system to register people. So this is a reaction to the concern that with this new online system, it already, once online, it already eliminates or limits a portion of the population's access to it. So Philisiwe in her community. And then Mzamo says that the idea of reaching places of worship to register people manually is a great idea. Thank you very much, Mzamo. We're glad that you're back. And again, in the chat function, we'll see Unomfundo assisted us with typing out her explanation of the difference rather between an invited space and an invented space, so that we get to understand and know what are these terms. We know that being a part of civil society sometimes, in fact, many of the time, get a chance to be invited to particular spaces. We know what community activists are being treated like in this country, and how the police and security forces are the most from active who are loud and vocal in the communities as community leaders. So thank you very much, Nomfundo, for giving us insight, so we know what these invited and these invented spaces are, and you can make use of them. Mzamo?
Yes, Philisiwe, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, but we cannot see you. No, still, I can't.
I know you can see me. You can see me, Philisiwe, I'm sure.
Yes, we can, thank you.
Yeah, no, greetings to everyone, who took time to attend such an important event, I think when you go at a community level, there will always be questions, that community members are always posing, questions like, will the vaccine provide long-term protection? These are the questions that people at a community level, ask. But I think a debate that was held at National Parliament.
Sorry. Oh, during your introduction, you broke up a bit. Can you please repeat for us, Ubuti?
Okay. No, I was saying when you engage with communities at a local level, engaging with communities at a local level and community-based organizations, there is a fear around, the vaccine, which then requires us as the civil society to do a lot of vaccine literacy, at a local level. But one of the questions that people pose is, will the vaccine provide a long-term protection? But I think then Joe Pasa, the deputy minister, I think when they were engaging him in parliament, I think it has raised a lot of fears that requires us as a collective to correct, in a form of a community-based vaccine literacy. They asked a question as to say, it was Friday when he told Parliament that vaccine being administered was not formally registered with SAHPRA. He mentioned that this vaccine is part of a batch used to conduct a worldwide expanded study. It's a very big language, and no one, has come to ordinary people to explain, what is an expanded study, and these are the questions that people ask at a local level. But it also raised fear when he said it is not yet registered, but it's part of the expanded study. These are the issues, which intimidate people at a community level, which then requires us, as civil society to do more on vaccine literacy. This required, a united civil society. One speaker was talking about as to how harsh is the state. These are the issues that we've been saying for years, that the civil society is disorganized, it's weak, but the state is becoming hard, every day. So it's a weak, disorganized civil society in a hard state, the state is very quick to respond, in a violent way every time when people are trying to make their grievances, I think this requires then us to be more united, it requires us to monitor and hold government accountable on issues of the vaccine. We all know that as the civil society, we're an essential ingredient of development. We need to ensure that there is good governance, and we are the ones who are the voice, of the voiceless, segments of our society. So this requires us then to come up with a plan, as to say, going forward, all of us who are present here, how do we reach communities and make sure that people who are living in deep rural areas have this information, and also to hold government accountable to ensure that the government uses simple language that people in rural areas can understand, so that we can save more lives to COVID-19. I think these are the issues, that we need to take forward and to make sure that people get access to information in the language that they will understand, that people understand what is an expanded study, all those things, people at a grassroots level need to understand such issues. But going forward, we need to make sure that everyone gets vaccinated. We need to put more pressure on government. We need to engage government while doing our part on community awareness and education, but more pressure must go to the government. I think there is a proposal which was made. Let me not say it's a proposal. I think it's something to learn on, which was put by Visega when she said they have reached out places of worship, and I think that is a good idea, that we must reach places of worship, to make sure that people register manual, come up with another plan to register more people manual, so that more people, get vaccinated. We also need to engage also political parties to come on board, not to score political points. The agenda is one, the agenda is to save lives, and be clear to them that this space is not for them to score political points, but this space is for them to take part in saving lives of people they need during elections. Because the fact is, you will see political parties campaigning, going to people, they will do whatever to reach people during election times. They must also commit, political parties must commit to ensure that people get vaccinated. We need to see them making a declaration of commitment as to say, as much as they want people to vote, but if people are dying, if people are sick, who is going to vote? We need everyone. We need everyone coming together. We need political parties. We need religious leaders. We need networks of people who are playing soccer together. We need networks of people who are playing netball together. So we need all social networks, to make sure that a huge number is vaccinated. So all of us, we need to come together, including political parties, because now we are going to local government election, we'll see them active. So this is the time to hold them accountable, to say, come, let us make a declaration of commitment that your party, will play a role in making sure that people, get vaccinated. We know the game of politicians is to demonize and antagonize each other, but this one, is to save lives, which is very, very important. And we have lessons from HIV and AIDS. We saw that more people, HIV before AIDS-related illnesses killed poor people more than any other. And the majority of people were Black, and they were women. And this is the same thing that may happen with COVID-19, that more poor people are going to suffer, I think this is my contribution, to say, let us all come together, let us bring everyone on board to make sure that we save lives and people understand the vaccine they are taking. You know, people must understand the kind of any medicine they are taking. You know, they must know what are the side effects. They must know everything, you know, about any medicine they are taking, and that must happen, you know, with vaccine. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Siyabonga Mzamo, Siyabonga Impela, and you make very valid points, and we hear your call to all civil society organizations, NGOs, CSOs, CBOs, all social formations, and I think it's really been a great pleasure to be on a wonderful mix of speakers who are part of different spheres in society, and we get to access different people and different organizations and different information at different stages, in fact. And it's really been insightful to have frontline workers like Ungazini and people like Jane who work directly with people who might be infected, who do testing on a regular basis of people around them, and get to share more information about what exactly is the coronavirus, what is COVID, can we as society, as people, engage and live with it? Because if you hear, the us mentions that corona is going to be with us for a while longer than we would like it to be. Right. I think the onus is on us now to do things to encourage people around us to get themselves informed, protect ourselves, and make sure that we all play our role and our part in protecting and saving each other. So like Mzamo had mentioned also that this year is actually an election year in this country, and we're going to be having local government elections in the next 2 months. And honestly, as community activists and as communities, we have the power in our vote, and it's really important how we can use our vote in a way that will benefit us and the majority of the people. Uvi Sega also spoke when she was answering the question on, is it fair that companies that can afford it have access to this have access to the vaccine? And then she mentions the term of public good. Right? How do we, in as much as you want to protect yourself, but also protect the people around you, right? We know that no man is an island, and we all coexist and need each other as society, especially civil society. We know that that space is a shrinking space. Unfortunately, we are always have targets on our backs, and our lives are threatened on a regular basis, on a daily basis. And we now need to come together and discuss clearly and properly, okay, what exactly should we all be doing? Restrictions are starting to loosen. Our country is not fortunate like that, and there are a lot of people who are still at risk of contracting the virus. And one of the ways that people can also contract the virus is not knowing what to do and how to do it, and how to protect yourself safely. So hopefully this workshop was one of the spaces where we can get information from each other. I did see that there were some links shared on the chat function of things to get ourselves equipped. And of course, our wonderful contributed to the platform. Thank you to Kathy, who was present, who spoke first, to Unomfundo, to Nashe. Unfortunately, because wasn't able to join us for this workshop. He also would have added some great insight into the work that he's done. I'm not sure if anybody, any of our speakers, words, closing remarks, final thoughts has brought. or any question rather. Does anybody else have a question that hasn't been answered, or a new question that has now popped up into your mind? Okay, that seems to be a no. Mzamo?
Philisiwe?
Yes. I think we're almost towards our time that we had set for this discussion. I think you can wrap up for us, please, and close.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Philisiwe. And I think we will be untrue to the deepest human feeling, if not less than human feeling, if we don't thank, everyone who took time, to participate in such an important, event, which is aimed at saving lives, Thank you very much for participating. We will communicate going forward as to what is the next, on the topic of the vaccine. But thank you very much for participating in this workshop, and thank you very much for your presentation, for your questions, for your comments. They will all help, going forward in coming up with a plan, going forward. Thank you very much. Thank you, Philisiwe.
Thank you. Thanks to everybody.